All right. Uh, Looks like we're on.
Yeah, we are
We're
live.
live. All right. Right. Live. Perfect. Um, right. Well, welcome everyone who's uh, been following us along over these last months. Matt, do you happen to? Well, first off, Matt, how are you? How's everything?
I'm good. I'm
All
I'm
right.
well.
All
How are you?
right. I'm doing it. I'm doing it. Um, yeah. So, wow, this is Christmas week. Uh, let's see. Let's see how things transpire. And I guess we've got after today, we've got, from what I can tell, 8 more chapters to go. I don't know the length of each particular chapter, but we are at the tail end of reading this fat book.
Can you believe it?
Yeah, wow. That's
Yeah.
something. That's something. Well, how goes it in the world of poetry, Matt?
Well, this is the time of the year where everybody shuts down and starts doing like whatever it is they're gonna do with their lives,
Yeah.
and so it's the worst part of the year for me. 'Cause it's like either where everyone decides to kind of like relax, take it easy,
Yeah.
contemplate their lives and stuff like
Yeah.
that. And then they just get depressed and they spend, all kinds of time with people that they avoid all year long. And I think that's going to make them happy out of a sense of obligation. So
Yeah.
this is the worst of the
Yeah.
year for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
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 Really.
It's a tough time for some folks, and
Well, they
my,
make it tough. Like, really, they make it tough. They
yeah.
make it
Yeah.
tough. I mean,
Yeah.
like,
That's true. Yeah.
if you can spend time with people you don't like or people that you avoid for the whole year, there's a reason you avoid them. And then you're gonna spend time and you can't talk to people you do like to talk to,
Yeah.
the people you do like, people you choose to spend 10 months out of the year normally surrounding yourself with. You push them aside for 2 months so they can go spend time with people they don't really like. You spend that time with people you don't. And everyone wonders, why do I get depressed during the holidays? I'll be materialist about
Yeah.
things.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's a tough time, especially for those of us uh, who long to be with folks that are no longer around. So, my condolences to folks out there. I know some people have lost relatives, especially recently with things having to do with COVID. I've become aware of such things, and so my condolences for those folks who, um, well, are certainly emotionally affected by this time of the year on account of these impossibilities. But uh, time marches on, and we continue. We continue. I'm really glad to be here doing this work with you, Matt. It's been very informative. It's been a great learning experience for me. I was commenting about this project with She Who Must Be Obeyed with the boss. I was commenting with her about this project, and I feel very privileged. For various reasons, people don't have the time or the capacity to trudge through this particular book, and so I'm very lucky to have read as much as I have of it, and I consider myself now much more well informed about the world around me and about history and so on. And of course, that's been possible because I've had the opportunity to be in interaction with you, Matt, and with other folks that have chimed in uh, on Facebook. And I've done my best to respond to folks when we're off. So, anyway, well, to the task at hand, chapter 18. And I'd like to, I'd like to remind folks that chapter 8, the title of chapter 18 is it's actually a continuation of other chapters. In this case, various formulae for the rate of surplus value. That's chapter 18. But before we get into its abstractions, which are, the substance of this particular chapter, what I'd like to do, Matt, is I'd like to talk a little bit about a documentary movie that I recently saw. In fact, I assigned it to my students in my sociology of race class, and it's a documentary called The Valley of Tears. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's a movie that was produced by David Sandoval, whose name, of course, is very familiar to you, person that is very familiar to you and to many folks out there. And I'd like to talk about this movie because at the very least, I'd like to talk about the first 15 minutes, briefly, of course, about this movie, because the movie provides the historical context by which we can make sense of Marx's discussions concerning the various ideological battles that are taking place in his time around studies of the economy. But before we get into those kind of abstractions, for those abstractions to be sensible, to make sense to us, I'd like to talk about the Valley of Tears, and I'd like to talk about the opening scene, and then a couple scenes following afterwards, and get your thoughts before we get into the stuff of this book. The scene begins with a rancher. And I guess before I talk about the movie, as focused as I am going to be, the movie is about. The movie is a story. It's a true story, of course, of Texas farm labor leaders Jesus Moya and Juanita Valdez, who were labor leaders of Raymondville, Texas onion strike of 1979, and who, on account of their honest attention, and I'd like to underscore this, their honest attention to the exploitative relations at the hands of Texas Southern agribusiness against Mexican field workers, they were, Juanita Valdez and Jesus Moya, were accused of, as this particular rancher, about whom I'm going to talk in a bit, says, splitting the community, right? Where apparently, a community where apparently everybody needed each other and everybody was singing a kind of kumbaya in Raymondville, Texas. So anyway, the scene begins with this particular rancher being interviewed, agribusiness rancher being interviewed, and he says, I need these people, and of course he's talking about Mexican field workers, I need these people as much as they need me. And anybody that lives in New York or the Midwest or Canada that goes in to buy produce off the shelf that was picked by hand labor needs these people too, right? So there you go, right? There is an understanding, right, that as folks have been saying over the last 8 or 9 months, that we are, quote unquote, all in this together, that there is a level of normalcy, there is a level of interaction, interdependence, and that whereby everybody who is playing their part is making sure, right, that there is peace on earth, to use that phrase as it is in season, that there is peace on earth, right, and everybody loves one another, everybody goes to church together, right? Everybody goes to church together, everybody prays to the same God, and everybody has a chance to go to heaven together. To be a little bit more specific, Paul Whitward, who's the editor of the local Raymondville Chronicle, says amidst pictures of Ronald Reagan and George Bush that the onion strike was caused by labor leader agitators from the San Juan area to interrupt the onion harvest. And before I turn it over to you, Matt, I'd like to just kind of provide some kind of analytical context here. Effectively, this is as much a battle rooted in fundamental dialectical material relations between Mexican workers who recognize the value they surrender to white Southern capital and the same capital who only wants one thing. And what is that thing? Mexicans to surrender more value. But as I said, the battle is as much a material battle as it is an interpretive one. What I might say is an ideological battle. In other words, where status quo racial and economic arrangements framed in conventional, we are the world, can't we all just get along politics, injure those made vulnerable by racist and xenophobic capitalist relations, and fatten racist and xenophobic Southern capitalists who architect these relations. Those same politics resist a framing of the status quo as essentially exploitative. Thus, it is that outside agitators and not the ruling class are blurring reality, are agitating reality. Matt?
So what's being presented here is this idea that the workers in the field workers are as needed by the general population as much as the field workers need the consumption base, right? They need us, we need them, etc. Right? And this is seen as a very good and liberal line. Reminds me of a movie in the remake of Robin Hood, the most recent adaptation of Robin Hood, where what's his name? Russell Crowe, I think, says to some other actor, like, and there's a deeper truth. And he's like, and what's that? It's that the king needs the people like the people need the king, right? The reality is that the workers don't need the capitalist at all. Like, they don't need the capitalist. In fact, what you're describing, this world that keeps the world spinning, this like the fact that we're all interdependent upon one another, in order to keep surviving, that's been true since we've been on Earth. I mean, that's been true since we've like walked around, right? Since we've whatever we're not like reptiles. We don't like breed and abandon our children, right? So like we don't just all go our separate ways. We like form in like these little groups and we divide labor, and that happens. Marx described, I think, as a natural division of labor in the early days, right? It's called the early days, right? And so what we're looking at here, when someone says that in American political ideology and any really ideology around the world, is to say that on the right side, on the what's considered like more right wing, libertarian type politics, it's like this rugged individual. It's this one person. They are encumbered by society, and they must break free from society. So they may do this thing, abiding to a higher principle that exists above and outside society, right?
Yeah.
And so then there's like the left side, the supposedly left side. I mean, when we consider left, I mean, a left-wing defense of our society, let's put it that way, a liberal defense of our society, which would say that no, we all need each other. No, we all move together. No, we all whatever, and somehow justify the fact that in this process in which we're all moving together, some people aren't moving at all. I mean, some people are living off the movement of others. Right, and so that is what capital is. I mean, capital is the fact that some people are living at the expense of other people, right? And they're not doing anything. Now, you can get into more more layered understanding of it about the global proletariat. Now, the imperial proletariat, the proletariat of the imperial core, the workers, and they're form of sort of labor aristocracy, and all this kind of Maoist kind of thing. And maybe Lenin said too. So, but maybe there's some truth to that about the imperial working class. But nonetheless, a person in the imperial working class still has to work, right? They still have to go do something. They still have to. Their labor is still enriching someone else, right?
Yeah.
So the fact of the matter is, there's a group of people, capitalists, who do nothing but own. Now, they may have come up with the product, they may have come up with an idea, they may not have been born a capitalist, they may become a capitalist. But once they are a capitalist, the fact that they show up to work every day is incidental. It is incidental, right? The fact of the matter is that money is coming to them off the work of others, right? So when we talk about like this person needs that as much as that, no, that is an illusion that props up the system, and then and the way it ends up working in the political sphere is that like instead of debating the truth, like instead of debating like the truth, like, well, instead of exposing the truth, I don't really want to debate that, instead of exposing the truth, we end up in this debate, which is like, are workers and owners, or workers, and we don't even think of them as owners, we think of them as idea men, right? Are workers and management, are workers and like capital, are workers and are the rich and the poor working together? Is it just one America, right? And that's supposed to be a good liberal line. Is it just one America? Rich, poor, black, white, gay, straight, right? Men, women, all also, that's like a good line and includes everybody, right? Versus, I don't care what color you are, if you can go out there and kick ass and do this and do that, then no government agency should tell you how to flush the toilet and blah, 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 right? And so then then you end up in this really stupid debate, and it keeps everyone very stupid. It keeps everyone like just running in circles, saying ridiculous things and arguing about ridiculous things. And at no point in time does the basic relationship of capital, which is there are people living at your expense who do nothing, and you know who they are. They're very easy to find out who they are. They are the people that own these companies. They are the owners of these companies. That's it. And so, and so you find out who they are. It's not that hard to find out. And those are the people who live at your expense. And maybe they don't live directly at your expense because you don't work for that company, but essentially they collectively live at your expense. Someone like them is living at your expense. And so is that's the basic situation we're in, but we don't see that because we're constantly looking at this idea that we're all in this together. We're promoting the noblesse of
yes.
We're promoting like a noblesse bourgeoisie ideology versus a Randian, where it's just like society is encumbered by too many rules, and we need to like just smash people hammers and shit, right? So like we're debating between like absolute chaos and bourgeois noblesse.
Yeah,
but we don't ever talk about like what's actually happening.
There's opportunity in the discussion that we've just had, and perhaps we'll get into it. Perhaps folks will chime in at some point. I don't see any here on my screen at the moment, but in any case, I'm really interested in this purported glue that pulls everybody together so that everybody can just get along, as the saying goes, right? In other words, what is the illusion that compels us to fall for that narrative? And I think that your attention to this concept of one America, certainly this one America that has been narrated and discussed over the centuries. Certainly, it was one that was generated following and before, and then of course immediately following the U.S. Civil War, that allowed for the permanence of the nation, and certainly the permanence of a nation on the bedrock of capitalist relations, on the bedrock of new and emerging capitalist relations that have since been the foundation for the ways in which we quote unquote get along. I'd like to just provide a kind of transition here about the discussion that we've just had. This more practical, real, and tangible set of relations in Texas Southern agribusiness, right? That these relationships that are addressed by Juan Moya, that are addressed by Juanita Valdez in the movie, and other people, of course, in the movie, is a stepping stone for us to understand a capitalism that is either inattentive to itself or would have others be inattentive to it, and equally inattentive to the character and the condition of Texas Southern agribusiness, of Texas Southern capitalism, right? Where whites consider their field workers their Mexicans, right? And they consider them their Mexicans as they consider the field their field. So first, what does it mean for capital to be inattentive to itself? The answer to this question is rooted in an earlier discussion about Aristotle's own inattention, his own ignorance, and his own misrecognition of value. So remember, we're talking about two, at least what I'm proposing that we do is to talk about a capitalism that is inattentive to itself, and the promotion of this glue, this promotion of this illusion, this promotion of this one America. In other words, this notion that there is nothing to pay attention to. And I'd like simply to remind folks that this is not new in capital, as I've come to understand. As Marx critiques Ricardo, or as Marx critiques Adam Smith, right? So too has he already critiqued Aristotle, and I'd like to just remind folks about that, and then I'll turn it over to you, man, so that we can begin to talk about.
Before we get into all the different critiques Marx has for previous people trying to describe the world as it is, right? You mentioned the world, the economy coming out of the Civil War, and I think this is oftentimes why we don't really understand our place in this country, because our role in this history is never taught. We're taught to view ourselves through the lens of different histories, right? So in the aftermath of the Civil War, there's big questions: what is to become of millions of freed slaves, or millions of people who've been enslaved and are now free, right? And so just various proposals, various ideas. I think Lincoln wanted to create a colony in Africa. I mean, there's all kinds of just different ideas going on at the time. During Reconstruction, there was actually a lot of movement towards a greater integration to American society that gets destroyed with redemption. And there's all kinds of things going along in this particular history, right? But that is not that's one set of history, right? And we're kind of taught maybe that's the lens we should look at what happened, as Chicanos, maybe like that kind of lens of Reconstruction and redemption, or maybe we should see ourselves that way, right? Again, you're going to run into problems that way, because that is not your history. That is not what happened to you. Another one is to look at, like, in the aftermath of the Civil War, you have industrialization of the United States at a level that was not taking place before that, right? Because before that, Southern agriculture dominated the U.S. economy, and getting that cotton out to the world market, getting it out to Europe, getting it out to different places in the world, right? And so the North actually develops as kind of an adjunct of the South, right? So there's shipbuilding and all kinds of things to get that out. As the North develops, it develops its own power base, it develops its own capitalists that have their own desires. They need to destroy the slave power, right? So after having destroyed the slave power, they carry out their program, which is to create giant cities all across the Midwest. Now, you take a city like Chicago in the 1880s, right? Chicago's something like 94% white, something like 80% foreign born, right? Yeah. Meaning coming from Europe, meaning coming from Ireland, coming from Italy, coming from all different places. And then you have all these ethnic boroughs that pop up in Chicago. Similar to New York, but even more so in Chicago, right? Because you're talking about in the 1880s, the majority of the city they're white, and they're not American. They're not white Americans. They're people that were literally born in another country, right? So then we say that's how we should see ourselves, as like one of the last groups to join the melting pot, right? That's another lens that is put upon us, that we should think of ourselves that way. But the reality of the melting pot, the reality of the oppression of Slavic people, Polish people, etc., Italians, is they are integrating into a time, they're coming into a country, and forming a kind of industrial workforce at a time during an industrial expansion. So their ascension into the general economy, their ascension, the way we try to like frame it, their ascension into whiteness, but their ascension into the general economy is predestined. I mean, it is predestined. It is baked into the actual movement of the development of industry in the United States. It is an imported proletariat. It is an imported industrial proletariat, right? And so their ability to argue and fight and organize and get ways into politics, right, that takes place in the 1800s, late 1800s to early 1940s ish, and then after the GI Bill becoming just regular parts of American society that nobody thinks about anymore, right? That was baked into the plan, right? Again, that's also not our history. And so my simple proposal is that our history is our history. And we must learn our history to understand our current situation. And if I would make the argument that the history of the United States, vis-a-vis the Mexican population, is to control the number of Mexicans in the United States, and to get their labor without having their physical presence, their labor without their bodies, get their labor without their citizenship, get their labor without what. That's why there's always this. That's why there's such a blurry line between being a Mexican American, being a Mexican national, and being this and this. And even though you don't speak any Spanish, you culturally just consume the rest of everything else that everyone else in America is getting. You're still a Mexican, right? So that kind of thing still, because America is designed vis-a-vis the Mexican question to limit the amount of Mexicans in it. I mean, Arizona doesn't become a state until it has a white majority population. That's one example. I mean, everything about you have the Bracero program, which overlaps with Operation Wetback. All these things come around the question of if there's too many Mexicans, it's no longer the United States. This pocket of the United States is no longer the United States because there's too many Mexicans. And that is that is the direct appeal that we've had for the last 4 years from people like Donald Trump, Lou Dobbs, Tucker Carlson, all these kind of people. They're all really basically saying that there are too many of these brown people, and therefore the United States is losing its cultural stability as this place. So that is really, but that's not, that appears new because it's so direct and because there are these big numbers, but controlling these numbers has been the thorough line of this story. And if we look at it that way, we can understand why Operation Wetback and Bracero program overlap. We can understand Prop 187. We can understand all these things over and over again. If we can look at this historical timeline with that lens, everything begins to make sense.
So our task then is to make sense of these very tangible set of experiences in history, in the propagation of this illusion, this glue, etc., and to think about what the algorithms are, what the historic, what I mean by that question is, what are the ideological suppositions, what are the ideological premises that facilitate our understanding that if I'm going to understand myself as a quote unquote Mexican, I ought to look at the experiences of Black sharecroppers in Louisiana, or immigrant Italians in New York, without conceptualizing and understanding ourselves, right, as Mexican people, with a relationship to this territory, with a relationship with this land, and that found itself at the time of U.S. conquest of this portion of what is now become the United States, that found itself outside of the chessboard, that found itself outside of the chess game that white society had plotted for this particular territory. And so it's important then to turn to Marx, not to understand Mexican history in particular, but to understand the logic, or rather the absence of logic, that would allow me to turn to the history and experiences of Russian Jews in New York in order to understand myself as a quote-unquote Mexican American in the United States. It doesn't make sense. So I follow your.
It makes absolutely no sense. And if you want to, which is not to say that the study of these histories is not fruitful, is not interesting, or is not,
or that it's not related to ours, because I'm certainly not.
Or not related, or would not bring clarity to the situation, and you look outside the window, because these are people who also live in this country and exist in this country, and whose histories and trajectories shape this country, right? But it does nothing if you can't understand anything if you don't look at it, if you don't isolate it and understand it in its particularities, right? And we are taught constantly in this country not to understand things in particular, and we're supposed to kind of like try to view things through a lens, all kinds of lenses that make absolutely no sense. But when you mention this thing about the development after the Civil War, very pivotal point in the development of the U.S. economy, probably the most, I don't know, I mean, there's been like 4 or 5, right? But like it's one of them. Just massive restructuring of things, a massive a change of directions, and that was, but see, we when we think of ourselves as either this group or that group, or we're closer to this and we're kind of like that, we're not that, that's only because we don't actually know our own history. So and people that do that and call themselves Marxists, that try to like make these weird comparisons that don't have anything to do with it, I call them ahistorical Marxists or ahistorical materialists, right? They're ahistorical materialists in that they are trying to examine material reality. They're trying to like apply theory with absolutely no history. Like, you don't know what happened.
Yeah.
Now think about this in your own life, right? Like, let's say you were supposed to get the Christmas tree or something like this, right? You had an arrangement with family. You were supposed to go get it. But like someone down the line is trying to examine what happened that day, and they were arguing, and they were saying the Christmas tree was not gotten, and that was it, right? Well, you don't know the history. You don't know the specifics, and you can't theorize unless you know the specific things that happen, right? And so there's the theorizing around a group of people without knowing the without having the material to analyze, and that material is the history of that group of people. And so I know this is kind of like off topic of what we're talking about today, but I really, when you mention the Civil War, when you mention that pivotal shift, I really think about, like, okay, the 1800s, what comes after that, and how it is in those times, that period of time, we have these historical trajectories that we are supposed to pick one of those lenses and see ourselves, and neither of those make sense.
Yeah.
Because it wouldn't make sense to do that if you're Chinese American either. I mean, it just does not make sense to view yourself as somebody else. Back when I was 5 and I was you instead of me. Like, no, I was always me.
So how is it then? I'll remind folks that in a previous chapter that we read, trying to find the name of the chapter. I've got my hand on the quote that I want to read, but anyway, it's a chapter on the question of commodities, right? And in this case, Aristotle is critiqued by Marx on account of his blindness, his inattention, his ignorance about the value of workers. And Marx writes, there was, however, an important fact which prevented Aristotle from seeing that to attribute value to commodities is merely a mode of expressing all labor as equal human labor, and consequently as labor of equal quality. Greek society was founded upon slavery and had therefore for its natural basis the inequality of men and of their labor powers. The secret of the expression of value, namely that all kinds of labor are equal and equivalent, because and so far as they are human labor in general, cannot be deciphered until the notion of human equality has already acquired fixity of a popular prejudice. This, however, is possible only in a society in which the great mass of the produce of labor takes the form of commodities, in which consequently the dominant relation between man and man is that of owners of commodities. The brilliancy of Aristotle's genius is shown by this alone, that he discovered in the expression of the value of commodities a relation of equality. The peculiar conditions of the society in which he lived, however, alone prevented him from discovering what in truth was at the bottom of this equality.
Well, I mean, like I think Marx is being a little generous there, because the reality is that Aristotle was paid very well not to understand these things. I mean, like, Aristotle is a teacher of Alexander, and like, this guy is he's not in a position to understand things. If that makes sense. He's not a part of it financially, huh?
And that's why this particular comparison, right, is useful for understanding then, and building upon a discussion that we had last week, where we're thinking about Ricardo, for instance, who was himself paid not to understand the truth, right, to propagate a misunderstanding. Certainly. So your point is well taken. Your point is well taken.
But I think that's really, I mean, that's a good jumping off point, though, because, like, how many people today do we find in Aristotle's time, the role of a professor, the role of a thinker, the role of whatever, those positions were few and far between. I mean, it was not like it was the idea, like, to be the sagely advisor to so and so and such and such. That was not like something that you could just, like, train for. You have to be born into it. I mean, there's all kinds of complications there, right? But today we have an army of people who are paid to not understand things, who are paid to lie, who are paid to misrepresent, and they're called professors. And
a lot of professors.
Huh?
A lot of professors. Not all professors.
Well, no, but that's not what they're not paid. You're not paid to tell the truth. Like, you're a rogue. You're like a rogue professor, right? You're like you're out there in the wilderness, like, doing your own thing.
Yeah.
No, but that's not. But the job description is I mean, no one will describe it as like, hey, we're going to pay you to lie. But I mean, that is what it is. I mean, you are paid to explain the world in a coherent fashion and make sense of it, and basically say that this system that we have here is phenomenal, and if you do your part and you do the right thing, you're going to thrive within it, and your life will have meaning, and you will serve a greater purpose than yourself, which is the society you live in. And isn't that wonderful? Isn't that great? And here's how you do it. And in the way you do that, you train people to become intermediaries of exploitation. I mean, you train people to either be exploited. I mean, you train everyone to get exploited, but you train people to either just get directly exploited, or you train them to not only be exploited, but also be the interlocutors of exploitation, the link in the chain of exploitation, somebody that will not only allow themselves to be exploited, but will actually provide, because they're going to college, right? So they're going to become a managerial class. So not only am I being exploited, but I'm also providing the exploitation of a greater base of proletariat.
Yeah. Well, Marx underscores repeatedly that it is this set of material conditions that is the engine for human relations, for human behavior and understandings. And so it is for Aristotle. Ontology, right, as I mentioned in a previous discussion, ontology bears on epistemology. In other words, fish who swim in clear water don't know they're in it. Or those of us who have clean water to drink don't know that we are thirsty. Now, if the architect raises his structure in imagination before he erects it in reality, there's another quote from a previous reading, and if workers are obligated to subordinate their will to this architecture, then what is the armature? Earlier, you were talking about an army, right? Earlier, you were talking about the role of conformist instructors, the role of conformist educators to socialize and inculcate obedience, and socialize and inculcate a sense of authority and power and privilege to administer oppression. In this case, I ask, what is the armature through which labor would develop its slumbering powers and compel them to act in obedience, right? And so that question, as I was contemplating it, reading chapter 18 last night, I thought about a book that one of the first clearly Marxist-inspired books, or Marxian-inspired books that I had read about 30 years ago. Of course, not only inspired by Karl Marx, but for me, this was a turning point in my understanding about society, culture, etc., and my role as a wordsmith, and certainly as somebody who seeks to paint reality on the basis of the words that I either put on paper or that I share in the classroom. And so I turn this moment to a couple quotes from Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Since I read this book, so long ago, I've distanced myself I've distanced myself from some of its premises, though certain of its premises continue to hold true for me and guide the work that I do, my interaction with people. This project, this relationship, this interaction with you on Monday mornings, for instance, is one of them. And these quotes actually speak to something that you were talking about earlier, Matt, and I'd like to share them coming from this particular text. Education, as the exercise of domination, stimulates the credulity of students with the ideological intent, often not perceived by educators, of indoctrinating them to adapt to the world of oppression. And then there's just another quote that I'd like to share, and I'd like to turn it over to you, Matt. A short quote here. It says, "It is necessary for the oppressors to approach the people in order via subjugation to keep them passive. This approximation, however, does not involve being with the people or require true communication. It is accomplished by the oppressors depositing myths indispensable to the preservation of the status quo. For example, the myth that the oppressive order is a free society, the myth that all persons are free to work where they wish, that if they don't like their boss, they can leave him and look for another job, the myth that this order respects human rights and is therefore worthy of esteem, the myth that anyone who is industrious can become an entrepreneur. Worse yet, the myth that the street vendor is as much an entrepreneur as the owner of a large factory." I'll stop there with this particular quote and turn it back to you, Matt, so that we can talk about these ideological confrontations that are taking place on the terrain of capital relations.
So it's interesting to me though that earlier you said you mentioned the word you said the word conformist when we're describing these professors, and the way the word conformist is often used is almost as though there's I feel like the word conformist is often misused, right? Conformist is almost like is used as some type of drill master or some type of so it gets you back in line when you're trying to when you're kind of deviating the way we in everyday language conformist, the word conformist, to conform, right, is so much larger in scope than those drill masters, taskmasters, those standing over you don't color outside the line, the kind of very Nurse Ratched or something like that. Those type people, right? Those demanders, right? They exist in society, but they are far fewer than those who simply conform. Those who simply conform make up the wide majority of society. 95% of people are conformists. I mean, almost everybody just goes with the program. You tell them this, you tell them young enough, they will believe it. It doesn't matter what. And you have a country in this country where people really believe that this nation, which bombs countries all over the world,
Yeah.
is the victim of all kinds of evil forces that want to get it.
Yeah.
That we are the ones that are the morally decent, upstanding group of people, and Iran is full of boogeymen. Russia's full of boogeymen. This country's full of so and so and so and so and such and such and such and such are full of like scary people who want to do evil things because we're so good. And you have people who are like 50 years old who believe that. These aren't children. These are people who are like who live long lives and they believe such nonsense. Such nonsense. And it's the wide majority of people who believe that. The wide majority. So that's what I mean that's what we're looking at here. We're looking at the wide majority of people believing all sorts of kind of myths, especially in the United States, of all types of just ideas that they can't possibly be true, things that cannot possibly be true. So when we use the word conformist, it often seems to be about those drill sergeants, those ideological drill sergeants that force anytime you have a little moment of breakaway to force you down. But that's not conformists. Conformity is you are swimming in conformity. You are conformist in ways you don't even know. Not just you, I mean all of us. In ways we don't even know, in ways we don't even contemplate, right? We just conform. We just, all right, we accept. We don't even think about it. And I'm not saying you got to challenge everything, because then if you challenge everything, you challenge nothing. But it's just you got to kind of pick your like thing.
Have you ever heard that? I think it's Pete Seeger. I think it's a Pete Seeger song. Have you ever heard that song, Little Boxes?
Yeah.
Have you ever heard that song? And I think that this discussion that we happen to be having at the moment is one that we can think about also as a continuation of that particular song. That is that we have been. I mean, this is a discussion that I have with my students often, right? About the ways in which we live our lives in a series of boxes, with the expectation and with the hope that we can continue to live our lives in a series of boxes, bigger and bigger boxes, right, as life progresses. And I'd like to contrast this expectation. I'd like to contrast this conformity, because the word really is a large word that not only gets at the cultural dispositions, the sense of our behavior, what is appropriate behavior, what is inappropriate behavior, what box we should find ourselves in as opposed to what box we should not find ourselves in, right? But I'd like to contrast this with an experience that I had about 20 years ago when I was a graduate student. And I saw something that I had never seen before. I didn't know how to make sense of it. And now I understand and appreciate and respect its significance. There was a young man walking along the pathway to class. As I was walking on the pathway to take care of some matter at the university, and the young man was not dressed in drag. In fact, my use of the word man is probably could rightfully be the subject of critique, and I concede to that. But the point that I'm trying to make is the following: this person, this young man, they was dressed with makeup and what I thought was costume. But as it turns out, this person, he, she, I don't know what term the young person used to identify himself. I never found myself in conversation with him. Was somebody that was well known on campus. And as a matter of fact, when I was working with undergraduate students as a teaching assistant, as a graduate teaching assistant, I was informed that this was commonplace for this person, for this young person. In other words, this person did not conform to the expectations for dress and behavior, and it startled it startled me. It caught me off guard 20 years ago when I came across it. And I think about the courage and the valor that it takes to live your life outside of established parameters of conformity, obedience, and accepted standards of culture, etc., etc. I bring this up on account of the discussion that we're having right now concerning the word conformity. That is, that we adapt behaviors, or we adapt to behaviors that are not only conforming to the expectations that other people have, but we adapt to behaviors that ensure that the structures in which we exist, the boxes in which we exist, remain in place, and as a matter of fact, the structures remain ignored. You know, Matt, I turn it back to you.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. I mean, the structures that we've taken place are, I mean, like we're talking about literal structures, the literal physical we're in, and like we get a bigger box, we get a shinier box, like maybe some boxes in this big, but it's a box in a better neighborhood of boxes,
Yeah.
or it's a box in a more exclusive neighborhood of boxes. It's a box,
Alpha box.
Yeah, it's an exclusive box. It's an exclusive box next to other exclusive boxes in the case of like high-rise apartments and this. And so you keep moving yourself around in these box to box to box to box. And it's very interesting. The people that tend to have the most contempt for these boxes, right? The people who tend to have the most contempt for the pursuit of boxes are those with the boxes. I mean, and then they like, oh man, it's not all about that. You got to go hiking. You got to go to nature. And so they go out on the weekend and reconnect to whatever. All the while, like going back and then being either a key mover and shaker in the world of boxes, or or, if you think about the people that like go hiking, I mean, they tend to be people with with pretty nice boxes. So like that or I don't know, maybe I'm extrapolating, but the point is that what else is there, right? Because I mean, we're going to build boxes to keep shelter from the winter, to keep from being eaten by bears. we're gonna think boxes, right? I don't know if there's anything nefarious about a life in a box, but the point is that like the way how unexamined life is, and how these hopes and dreams that are provided for us, should we engage with the world in a certain kind of way, and that it is right, and that it is morally correct. It is right. If you work hard, you deserve that box, and no one can take that box away from you. No one can challenge that is your box, right? And good for you. Now get back to work and give me that money, or like, and just go make that money. You go make money, right? Make money. Get a good job and make money, right? Well, who are you making money for? And that question is not really examined, because if you're getting paid like $150,000, you're producing probably $5 million worth of value. You know what I mean? You're whatever it is you're getting paid, even if it's really good, you're getting paid much less than you're producing. Otherwise, I don't know. Otherwise you'd live in Cuba. I mean, you live here in America, where that's what happens. And so or the company you're working for is going to go out of business. If they're paying you more than they're making, they're going to go out of business pretty quickly. That's the economic system that we live under, and there's no escaping that. There's no escaping that. So even if you like work for like an independent small business, some startup or something like that, some mom and pop, if they're paying you good, and they're not really making money, that situation is untenable. So it's independent of the will, or the nefariousness, or the goodness, or the charity, or the big heart, or the frozen heart, or the small heart. It's what's it, beyond good and evil. It's beyond Ebenezer Scrooge. It's not about the individual. It's not about the individual person. It's about the system that we live under. So, box to box, cradle to cradle, cradle to grave. That's what we're.
It's at some point it'd be very interesting to have a discussion, not now and not within the series of discussions we're having at the moment, but it'd be very interesting to, since you bring up Ebenezer Scrooge, it'd be very interesting to in the history of literature and the production of literature, it'd be very interesting to get at the a comparative study of Charles Dickens and Karl Marx on account of the fact that they seem to be writing about, from what I can remember from having read, different things, Oliver Twist, for instance, and they seem to be writing about the same set of circumstances, though their interpretation of the same set of circumstances would lead one to believe that there are elite people with noblesse, and here I'm talking about Charles Dickens, and on the other hand, in terms of Marx, there are elite people who are vampiric, who are cruel, and who are exploitative, if not extractive, and have been monsters in history. We're at the tail end, Matt, and I was hoping to get into Marx's critique of economists that would look at material relations as fractions, as opposed to the ratios that he was promoting in order to get at the monstrosity of capitalism, as opposed to the noblesse oblige of capitalists. But we'll save that for a subsequent discussion. I want to thank you and ask you, please, to bring poetic closure to our discussion, please.
All right, so I'm gonna do this poem. It's a little more abstract, but I wrote it, and it's for the book coming out after City on the Second Floor, which is supposedly apolitical, but I can't help myself, so so I'll kind of explain a little bit. This poem's called Avalanche, and it's basically about how we recreate our lives because we really don't have a choice. Avalanche. Dreams carry the night. Into daybreak, plans rush the dawn. By noon, the anxiety of avalanche, the avalanche of command comes into view. You will work the day away. Come quitting time, you will look to de-escalate, you will descale down the mountain. You will reach for any sign of life. You will find no such search party. You will see wary climbers not unlike yourself. In the evening, you will join them. You will sway. You will tremor. You will work your way to fever. You will release your fighting spirit. You will stupor towards dream. You will give your rage. You will show your teeth to the mountain. You will shout down the snowy peak.
I'm reminded of Sisyphus. I'm reminded of Sisyphus as I hear you. Is this the final version of the poem?
That's it, yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Matt. I've said it before and I'll continue to say it. I'm lucky to be in conversation with you about this, especially. And I'm lucky to find myself in conversation with folks who send me texts and stuff. And I think the understandings, the reality, however uncomfortable and disconcerting it is, needs to be exposed. It needs to be exposed. We need to pursue truth, and the work of Juan Moya and Juanita Valdez and Karl Marx and Matt Sedillo and rogue professors. And rogue professors. They need to, they need to be recognized. It's valid. It's important. It's valuable. Right. Thank you so much. All right.
To the rogue professor.